Hello students, today we discuss an important chapter, Nationalism in India. In this chapter, we focus only in the Gandhian era, that is 1950 to 1948. The Gandhian era is the third phase of nationalism in India. Mahatma Gandhi returned to India in January 1915. He had come from South Africa, where he had successfully fought the racist regime with a novel method of mass agitation, which he called Satyagraha. The idea of Satyagraha emphasized the power of the truth and the need to search for truth. After arriving in India, Mahatma Gandhi successfully organized satyagrahas in various places. The first three satyagrahas of Mahatma Gandhi in India. In 1960, he travelled to Champaran in Bihar to inspire the peasants to struggle against the oppressive plantation system. Then in 1970, he organized a satyagraha to support the peasants of the Kheda district of Gujarat. Affected by crop failure and plague epidemic, the peasants of Kheda could not pay the revenue and were demanding that revenue collection be relaxed. In 1918, Mahatma Gandhi went to Ahmedabad to organize a satyagraha movement amongst cotton mill workers. Mahatma Gandhi on Satyagraha. It is said of passive resistance that it is the weapon of the weak, but the power which is the subject of this article can be used only by the strong. This power is not passive resistance, indeed, it calls for intense activity. Satyagraha is not physical force. A satyagrahi does not inflict pain on the adversary. He does not seek his destruction. In the case of Satyagraha, there is no ill will whatever. Satyagraha is pure soul force. Truth is the very substance of the soul. That is why this force is called Satyagraha. Its soul is informed with knowledge. It burns the flame of love. Non-violence is the supreme dharma. Mahatma Gandhi started the non-cooperation movement as a reaction to Rowlatt Act, Jallianwala Bagh tragedy and the Khilafat issue. The Rowlatt Act 1919. The Rowlatt Act had been horribly passed through the Imperial Legislative Council despite the united opposition of the Indian members. It gave the government enormous powers to repress political activities and allowed detention of political prisoners without trial for 2 years. Jallianwala Bagh incident or Jallianwala Bagh tragedy. On 10th April, the police in Amritsar fired upon a peaceful procession, provoking widespread attacks on banks, post office and railway stations. Martial law was imposed and General Dyer took command. On 13th April, the infamous Jallianwala Bagh incident took place. On that day, a crowd of villagers who had come to Amritsar to attend a fair gathered in the enclosed ground of Jallianwala Bagh. Being from outside the city, they were unaware of the martial law that had been imposed. Dyer entered the area, blocked the exit point, and opened fire on the crowd, killing hundreds. Khilafat issue. The First World War had ended with the defeat of Ottoman Turkey, and there were rumors that a harsh peace treaty was going to be imposed on the Ottoman Emperor, the spiritual head of the Islamic world or Khalifa. Khilafat movement. To defend the Khalifa's temporal powers, a Khilafat committee was formed in Bombay in March 1919. A young generation of Muslim leaders like the Brothers Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali began discussing with Mahatma Gandhi about the possibility of a united mass action on the issue. Gandhi saw this an opportunity to bring Muslims under the umbrella of a united national movement at the Calcutta session in the Congress in September 1920. He convinced other leaders of the need to start a non-cooperation movement in the support of Khilafat as well as for Swaraj. Non-cooperation movement was started as a reaction to the Rowlatt Act, Jallianwala Bagh tragedy, Khilafat issue and other unfair actions against the Indians. Why non-cooperation? In his famous book Hind Swaraj in 1909, Mahatma Gandhi declared that British rule was established in India with the cooperation of Indians and had survived only because of this cooperation. If Indians refused to cooperate, British rule in India would collapse within a year and Swaraj would come. How could non-cooperation become a movement? Gandhi proposed that the movement should unfold in stages. It should begin with the surrender of titles that the government awarded and boycott of civil services, army, police, courts and legislative councils, schools and foreign goods. Then, in case of the government used repression, a full civil disobedience campaign could be launched. Through the summer of 1920, Mahatma Gandhi and Shaukat Ali tortured extensively, mobilizing popular support for the movement.
Next, we discuss about the different strands within the non-cooperation movement.
The non-cooperation Khilafat movement began in January 1921. Various social groups practiced in this movement, each with its own specific aspiration. All of them responded to the call of Swaraj, but the term meant different things to different people. The movement in the towns. The movement started with the middle class participation in the cities. Thousands of students left government-controlled schools and colleges. Headmasters and teachers resigned and lawyers gave up their legal practices. The council elections were boycotted in most provinces except Madras, where the Justice Party, the party of the non-Brahmins, felt that entering the council was one way of gaining some power, something that usually only Brahmins had access to. The effects of non-cooperation on the economic front were more dramatic. Foreign goods were boycotted, liquor shops picketed, and foreign cloth banned in huge bonfires. As the boycott movement spread and people began discarding imported clothes and wearing only Indian ones, protection of Indian textile mills and handloom went up. But this movement in the cities gradually slowed down for a variety of reasons. Khadi cloth was often more expensive than mass produced mill cloth, and poor people could not afford to buy it. The boycott of British institutions posed a problem. For the movement to be successful, alternative Indian institutions had to be set up so that they could be used to place of the British ones. These were slow to come up, so students and teachers began trickling back to government schools and lawyers joined by work in government courts. Rebellion in the countryside. From the cities, the non-cooperation movement spread to the countryside. It drew into its fold the struggles of peasants and tribals which were developing in different parts of India in the years after the war. In Awadh, peasants were led by Baba Ramchandra, a sannyasi who had earlier been to Fiji as an indented labor. The movement here was against talukdars and landlords who demanded from peasants exorbitantly high rents and a variety of other cess. Peasants had to do beggar and work at landlords' farms without any payment. As tenants, they had no security of tenure, being regularly evicted so that they could acquire no right over the leased land. The peasant movement demanded reduction of revenue, abolition of beggar, and social boycott of oppressive landlords. In many places, Nairobi bands were organized by panchayats to deprive landlords of the services of even barbers and washermen. In June 1920, Jawaharlal Nehru began going around the villages in Awadh, taking to the villages and trying to understand their grievances. By October, the Awadh Kisan Sabha was set up headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, Baba Ramchandra, and a few others. Within a month, over 300 branches had been set up in the villages around the region. So, when the non-cooperation movement began the following year, the effort of the Congress was to integrate the Awadh peasant struggle into the wider struggle. The peasant movement, however, developed in forms that the Congress leadership was unhappy with. Tribal peasants interpreted the message of Mahatma Gandhi and the idea of Swaraj yet another way. In the Gudan Hills of Andhra Pradesh, for instance, a militant guerrilla movement spread in the early 1920s, not a form of struggle that the Congress could oppose. Here, as in other forest regions, the colonial government had closed large forest areas, preventing people from entering forests to graze their cattle or to collect fuel wood and fruits. This enraged the hill people. Not only were their livelihoods affected, but they felt that their traditional rights were being denied. Alluri Sitaram Raju claimed that he had a variety of special powers. He could make correct astrological predictions and heal people, and he could survive even bullet shots. Captured by Raju, the rebels proclaimed that he was an incarnation of God. Raju talked to the greatness of Mahatma Gandhi, said he was inspired by the non-cooperation movement and pressured people to wear khadi and give up drinking, but at the same time he asserted that India could be liberated only by the use of force, not non-violence. The Kudem rebels attacked police stations, attempted to kill British officials, and carried on guerrilla warfare. For achieving Swaraj, Raju was captured and executed in 1924, and over time become a folk hero. Swaraj in the plantations. Workers too had their own understanding of Mahatma Gandhi and the notion of Swaraj. For plantation workers in Assam, freedom meant the right to move freely in and out of the confined space in which they were enclosed, and it meant retaining a link with the village from which they had come. Under the Inland Immigration Act of 1859, plantation workers were not permitted to leave the tea gardens without permission, and in fact they were rarely given such permission. When they heard of the non-cooperation movement, thousands of workers defied the authorities, left the plantations and headed home. They believed that Gandhi Raj was coming and everyone would be given land in their own villages. They, however, never reached their destination. Stranded on the way by a railway and steamer strike, they were caught by the police and brutally beaten up.
In 1930s, Mahatma Gandhi started the second important movement against the British, that is the civil disobedience movement.
Within the Congress, some leaders were by now tired of mass struggles and wanted to participate in elections to the provincial councils that had been set up by the Government of India Act of 1990. They felt that it was important to oppose British policies within the councils, argue for freedom, and also demonstrate that these councils were not truly democratic. Swaraj Party. C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj Party within the Congress to argue for a return to council politics. But younger leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose pressed for more radical mass agitation and for full independence.
Next, we discuss about the Simon Commission. What is Simon Commission?
Simon Commission. The new Tory government in Britain constituted a statutory commission under Sir John Simon. Set up in response to the nationalist movement, the commission was took into the functioning of the constitutional system in India and suggest changes. The problem was that the commission did not have a single Indian member. They were all British. When the Simon Commission arrived in India in 1928, it was greeted with the slogan, "Go back Simon." All parties, including the Congress and the Muslim League, participated in the demonstrations. In an effort to win them over, the Viceroy Lord Irwin announced in October 1929 a vague offer of domain status for India in an unspecified future and a roundtable conference to discuss a future constitution. This did not satisfy the Congress leaders. The radicals within the Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose, became more assertive. The liberals and moderates who were proposing a constitutional system within the framework of British dominion gradually lost their influence.
What is the importance of Lahore Congress in the Indian national movement?
Lahore Congress. In December 1929, under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Lahore Congress formalized the demand of Purna Swaraj or full independence for India. It was declared that 26 January 1930 would be celebrated as the Independence Day when people were to take a pledge to struggle for complete independence.
The civil disobedience movement started with the famous Salt March or Dandi March.
The Salt March and the Civil Disobedience Movement. On 31st January 1930, Mahatma Gandhi sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin stating 11 demands. Some of these were of general interest, others were specific demands of different classes, from industrialists to peasants. The most stirring of all was the demand to abolish the salt tax. The tax on salt and the government monopoly over its production, Mahatma Gandhi declared, revealed the most oppressive phase of British rule. If the demands were not fulfilled by 11th March, the letter stated the Congress would launch a civil disobedience campaign. Irwin was unwilling to negotiate. So Mahatma Gandhi started his famous Salt March accompanied by 78 of his trusted volunteers. The march was over 240 miles from Gandhiji's ashramam to Sabarmati to the Gujarati coastal town of Dandi. The volunteers walked for 24 days, about 10 miles a day. On 6th April, he reached Dandi and ceremonially violated the law, manufactured salt by boiling seawater. This led to violent clashes in many places. When Abdul Ghaffar Khan, a devout disciple of Mahatma Gandhi, was arrested in April 1930, angry crowds demonstrated in the streets of Peshawar facing armed cars and police firing. Many were killed. A month later, when Mahatma Gandhi himself was arrested, industrial workers in Shokpur attacked police posts, municipal buildings, law courts and railway stations, all structures that symbolized British rule. A frightened government responded with a policy of brutal repression. Peaceful satyagrahis were attacked, women and children were beaten, and about 1 lakh people were arrested. In such a situation, Mahatma Gandhi once again decided to call off the movement and entered into a pact with Irwin on 5th March 1931.
What is Gandhi-Irwin Pact?
Gandhi-Irwin Pact. By this Gandhi-Irwin Pact on 5th March 1931, Gandhi consented to participate in a roundtable conference. The Congress had boycotted the first roundtable conference at the same time in London, and the government agreed to release the political prisoners. In December 1931, Gandhiji went to London for the conference, but the negotiations broke down and he returned disappointed.
Now we discuss about how participants saw the movement. How different social groups participated in the movement.
How participants saw the movement. In the countryside, rich peasant communities like the Patidas of Gujarat and the Jats of Uttar Pradesh were active in the movement. Being producers of commercial crops, they were very hard hit by the trade depression and falling prices. As their cash incomes disappeared, they found it impossible to pay government's revenue demand. And the refusal of the government to reduce the revenue demand led to widespread resentment. These rich peasants become enthusiastic supporters of the civil disobedience movement, organizing their communities and at times forcing reluctant members to participate in the boycott programs. For them, the fight for Swaraj was a struggle against high revenues. But they were deeply disappointed when the movement was called off in 1931 without the revenue rates being revised. So, when the movement was restarted in 1932, many of them refused to participate. The poorer peasantry were not just interested in the lowering of the revenue demand. Many of them were small tenants cultivating land they had rented from landlords. As the depression continued and cash incomes dwindled, the small tenants found it difficult to pay their rent. They wanted to unpaid rent to landlord to be remitted. They joined a variety of radical movements, often led by socialists and communists, apprehensive of raising issues that might upset the rich peasants and landlords. The Congress was unwilling to support no-rent campaigns in most places, so the relationship between the poor peasants and the Congress remained uncertain. To organize business interests, the Indian Industrial and Commercial Congress in 1920 and the Federation of the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries or FICCI in 1927. Led by prominent industrialists like Purushottam Das, Thakur Das and G.D. Birla, the industrialists attacked colonial control over the Indian economy and supported the civil disobedience movement when it was first launched. They gave financial assistance and refused to buy or sell imported goods. Most businessmen came to see Swaraj as a time when colonial restrictions on business would no longer exist and trade and industry would flourish without constraints. But after the failure of the Round Table Conference, business groups were no longer uniformly enthusiastic. In 1930, thousands of workers in Chota Nagpur tin mines wore Gandhi caps and participated in protest rallies and boycott campaigns. But the Congress was reluctant to include workers' demands as a part of its program of struggle. It felt that this would alienate industrialists and divide the anti-imperial forces. Another important feature of the civil disobedience movement was the large-scale participation of women. During Gandhi's Salt March, thousands of women came out of their homes to listen to him. They participated in protest marches, manufactured salt, and picketed foreign cloth and liquor shops. Many went to jail.
Various social groups participated in the civil disobedience movement, but so many groups did not actively participate in the civil disobedience movement. That limits the civil disobedience movement.
The limits of civil disobedience. For long, the Congress had ignored the Dalits for fear of offering the Santanis, the conservative high-caste Hindus. But Mahatma Gandhi declared that Swaraj would not come for 100 years if untouchability was not eliminated. He called the untouchables Harijan or the children of God, organized Satyagraha to secure them entry into temples and access to public wells, tanks, roads and schools. They began organizing themselves, demanding reserved seats in educational institutions and a separate electorate that would choose Dalit members for legislative councils. Political empowerment, they believed, would resolve the problems of their social disabilities. Dalit participation in the civil disobedience movement was therefore limited. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalits into the Depressed Class Association in 1930, clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Round Table Conference by demanding separate electorates for Dalits.
After the decline of the non-cooperation Khilafath movement, a large section of Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. From the mid-1920s, the Congress came to be more visibly associated with the openly Hindus religious nationalist groups like the Hindu Mahasabha. As relations between Hindus and Muslims worsened, each community organized religious processions with militant fervor, provoking Hindu-Muslim communal clashes and riots in various cities. Every riot deepened the distance between the two communities. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, one of the leaders of the Muslim League, was willing to give up the demand for separate electorates if Muslims were assured reserved seats in the Central Assembly and representation in proportion to population in the Muslim-dominated provinces like Bengal and Punjab. Many Muslim leaders and intellectuals expressed their concern about the status of Muslims as a minority within India. They feared that the culture and the identity of minorities should be submerged under the domination of a Hindu majority. The sense of collective belonging came through united struggles and a variety of cultural processes. Nationalism spreads when people begin to believe that they are all part of the same nation, when they discover some unity that binds them together. This sense of collective belonging came partially through the experience of united struggles, but there were also a variety of cultural processes through which nationalism captured people's imagination. History and fiction, folklore and songs, popular prints and symbols all played a part of the making of nationalism. In the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism, that the identity of India came to be visibly associated with the image of Bharat Mata. The image was first created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. In the 1870s, he wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland. Later, it was included in his novel Anandamath and widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Moved by the Swadeshi movement, Abhendranath Tagore painted his famous image of Bharat Mata. In this painting, Bharat Mata is portrayed as an aesthetic figure. She is calm, composed, divine, and spiritual. In subsequent years, the image of Bharat Mata acquired many different forms as it circulated in popular prints and was printed by different artists. Devotion to this mother figure came to be seen as evidence of one's nationalism. In Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore himself began collecting ballads, nursery rhymes and myths and led the movement for folk revival. In Madras, Natasha Shastri published a massive 4-volume collection of Tamil folk tales, the folklore of southern India. He believed that folklore was national treasure. It was the most trustworthy manifestation of people's real thoughts and characteristics. During the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, a tricolor flag, red, green and yellow was designed. It had 8 lotuses representing 8 provinces of British India and a crescent moon representing Hindus and Muslims. By 1921, Gandhi had designed the Swaraj flag. It was again a tricolor, red, green and white, and had a spinning wheel in the center, representing the Gandhian ideal of self-help. Carrying the flag, holding it aloft during marches became a symbol of defense. By the end of the 19th century, many Indians began feeling that too instilled a sense of pride in the nation. Indian history had to be taught about differently. The British saw Indians as backward and primitive, incapable of governing themselves. In response, Indians began looking into the past to discover India's great achievements. They wrote about the glorious developments in ancient times when art and architecture, science and mathematics, religion and culture, law and philosophy, crafts and trade had flourished. This glorious time, in their view, was followed by a history of decline when India was colonized. These nationalist histories urged the readers to take pride in India's great achievements in the past and struggle to change the miserable conditions of life under British rule. In 1942, Mahatma Gandhi started the Quit India movement against the British. That is the third important movement against the British. The failure of the Cripps mission and the effects of World War II created widespread discontentment in India. This led Gandhiji to launch a movement calling for complete withdrawal of the British from India. The Congress Working Committee, in its meeting in Wardha on 14 July 1942, passed the historic Quit India resolution demanding the immediate transfer of power to Indians and Quit India. On 8 August 1942 in Bombay, the All India Congress Committee endorsed the resolution which called for a non-violent mass struggle on the widest possible scale throughout the country. It was on this occasion that Gandhiji delivered the famous Do or Die speech. The call for Quit India almost brought the state machinery to a standstill in large parts of the country
as people voluntarily threw themselves into the thick of the movement. People observed hartals and demonstrations, and processions were accompanied by national songs and slogans. People movement was truly a mass movement which brought into its ambit thousands of ordinary people, namely students, workers, and peasants. It also saw the active participation of leaders, namely Jayaprakash Narayan, Aruna Asaf Ali, and Ram Manohar Lohia, and many women such as Madangini Hasra in Bengal, Kangalada Baruha in Assam, and Ramadevi in Odisha. The British responded with much force, yet it took more than a year to suppress the movement. Thanks for watching the video.